down with Adel Al-Jubeir, the Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs.
Do you believe that these meetings mean that President Biden has decided not to make Saudi Arabia a pariah?
I believe that quote was during the campaign, and the campaign is what I call the funny season. Lots of things happen, but people have a different perspective once they're in office and have access to intelligence and information, and they look at the vastness of the relationship. So it's a critically important relationship, and it's important that we have continue the tradition of personal contact between the leadership of our two countries.
One of the points of contention that President Biden's pointed out is human rights, and tonight he specifically said that he brought up Jamal Khashoggi's death to the Crown Prince. The president said that MBS said he was not personally responsible for it, and then the president said, I indicated to him that he probably was responsible for it. Is that how that went?
I didn't hear that exchange, that particular exchange. What I heard is that the president talked about the importance of human rights to the United States, and that human rights is an issue that American presidents attach great importance to, even though sometimes they don't live up to those ideals, which makes America human like the rest of the world.
Did the president bring up Jamal Khashoggi?
He mentioned the issue of Jamal Khashoggi, and he said that this is an issue that has generated a lot of interest and concern in the U.S. Congress and among the American public, and that he knew what Saudi Arabia's position was, and the Crown Prince indicated that Saudi Arabia did what every civilized country would do. We investigated, we brought charges against those who committed this crime. The courts rendered their verdicts, and those individuals were punished. America did this after Abu Ghraib. Nobody can say that George Bush as president was responsible or ordered Abu Ghraib.
President Biden said tonight that the Saudis, quote, share the urgency about lowering oil prices. Will Saudi Arabia push for OPEC Plus to increase oil production in the next few weeks?
Saudi Arabia's policy has always been to make sure that there are adequate supplies of oil that go to the markets.
Adequate is a different word than the president used.
Whatever the markets need. We try to ensure that the markets are adequately supplied. This has been our policy for a number of decades.
With all due respect, that doesn't sound like you're going to increase production in the next few weeks, as the president...
No, we have increased production over the last 9 months tremendously. There will be an OPEC meeting on the 3rd of August, I believe, and decisions will be made with regards to whether the market needs more crude or not. So it's not a yes or no.
Let's talk about Iran. U.S. and Israeli officials I speak to say the breakout time in Iran is just a few weeks, but that actually creating nuclear bombs might take as much as 2 years. Is that the Saudi assessment as well?
I can't comment on terms of specific assessments, but our view is that the Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon is extremely dangerous to the world and extremely dangerous to our region. We believe that Iran should be prevented from acquiring a nuclear weapon with all means possible. We believe that the JCPOA in its original form was too weak and too limited.
And therefore the deal that's on the table currently is also too weak and too limited?
We believe that any agreement has to ensure that Iran can never produce a nuclear weapon. Our criticism of the original deal was that it had a limit on how many years Iran was restricted from enriching, and it also had a limit with regards to the extent of the inspections. The inspections were very intrusive, but they were not broad enough.
The Crown Prince 4 years ago said that if Iran were to go nuclear, Saudi Arabia would also go nuclear. Has Saudi Arabia taken any steps toward that decision, given how close that breakout time is in Iran?
We certainly would not be discussing this on television.
COVID cases are spiking in many parts of the country, and hospital admissions have doubled since May. That's according to the CDC. This latest COVID surge is being driven by 2 new Omicron subvariants. The CDC estimates that together the BA4 and BA5 subvariants represent more than 80% of U.S. cases. And vaccination or prior infection does not guarantee protection from these subvariants. Joining us now to discuss all of this and what role vaccines play in this latest surge is Dr. Peter Hotez, Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. It's great to have you with us. And in the time since we've had a COVID vaccine, I think the only silver lining to catching COVID was that you likely wouldn't catch it again. But that seems to no longer be the case, especially with this latest Omicron subvariant. What accounts for that?
Well, what's happening, Jeff, is if you've had Omicron infection in the past, and a lot of Americans have, because during that big spike in January, there were roughly 1 million new cases a day, according to some estimates, that is not conferring protection against the BA.5 reinfection. So the other name for Omicron is BA.1. BA.1 is not conferring protection against BA.5 necessarily, unless you've been vaccinated on top of it, or unless you've also gotten vaccinated and boosted, preferably boosted twice. So that's what's really needed to combat this new BA.5 variant, is to max out your vaccinations. And that does seem to be keeping people out of the hospital, even if it's not necessarily preventing you from still getting infection and keeping you at home for a few days.
So do the current vaccines available now, are they targeted against the Omicron variant and the subvariants?
Not specifically. All of the current vaccines, both in the United States and globally, including our vaccine and used in India, are all developed against the original lineage that emerged out of central China. But if you have high enough levels of virus neutralizing antibody induced by the vaccine against the original lineage, there still seems to be significant spillover to the BA.5, enough to keep you from getting very, very sick. So for instance, the Centers for Disease Control put out some information in May among individuals over the age of 50, and there's a clear difference between those who are unvaccinated and those who are vaccinated, but there's even a clear difference to those who are vaccinated but not boosted and those who are boosted. And those who are boosted twice have a mortality rate that's pretty close to 0. So that's potentially really good news. But what it means is that you have to be mindful of your vaccination status. So if you've only gotten, say, 2 doses of the vaccine, you're still pretty vulnerable. You need to get that boost. And by the way, if you have been boosted once and you're over the age of 50 and therefore eligible for a second boost, get that second boost, because that will kind of lock in that you're not going to get very, very sick from this virus.
And Dr. Hotez, generally speaking, how do we stop playing catch up? I mean, first it was the Delta variant, and then it was the Omicron variant, and now it's the Omicron subvariants. Will we ever get to a point where we're not sort of in this situation?
We can, but there's a couple of things has to happen. First of all, we have to do a better job of vaccinating globally, because all of these new variants like Delta, BA.1 Omicron, BA.5 are all rising out of low and middle income countries where vaccination rates have been low. And so Mother Nature is basically telling us until we vaccinate the whole world, she'll continue to hurl new variants of concern at us. That's problem one. Problem two is, there's a lot of hand-wringing now about what we do for the next boost, because the boosts are not necessarily lasting as long as we'd hoped with mRNA. Do we now try to design a BA.5 specific boost, for instance? The problem there is by the time it's available and ready in the fall, BA.5 may already be in the rearview mirror. So there's a lot of interest, including our group, of developing a universal coronavirus vaccine to handle this and other future variants and potentially other future coronaviruses, because remember, this is COVID-19 is our third major coronavirus of global concern. So that's the long-term answer, is develop a universal coronavirus vaccine. What we really need to figure out is how we proceed between now and, say, the next year or two when that universal coronavirus vaccine becomes available. It's not clear to me that the BA.5 boost is going to be the answer, for the simple reason that by the time it's ready in the fall, it'll be behind us. So we have to look at potentially boosting with different technologies. We need an overarching strategy to really handle now the next few months.